Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Bookmark. Today we're going to be doing a book review on Neon Gods. So this book was pretty interesting, but yeah, so this is another book review today. If you are watching this in present time, this is our second video for the week because we didn't post last week, but we are posting again and we're going to keep up a regular schedule for now, I guess, but if anything changes, we'll let y'all know. But today we're gonna be doing our book review on Neon Gods. So let me just a disclaimer, if you are younger than 18, do not pick up this book because it has subject content matter that is very mature. So I sometimes even felt barely old enough to read this book. That's how spicy it gets in this book, but I will say that I still somewhat enjoyed it, even though romance isn't my preferred genre, and this is very much on the romance spectrum. But I initially actually read this book because I am I'm addicted to Greek retellings, Greek mythology, Roman mythology retellings, as you can. I don't know if you all can see, but I have the Song of Achilles somewhere here. I have Circe, I think right here actually. Yep, it's right there. I have some another Greek mythology retelling series in my TBR list. And then I even have, my first love was the Percy Jackson series and all the multiple mythology series that Rick Riordan has come out since then. So my thinking was I'm gonna love this book because of the retelling, and I will say that I think the reason I did get through this book and didn't just immediately just toss it to the side was that it did have this retelling aspect, and the retelling was actually pretty good. It was something different. So without going into too much spoilers, but kind of little summary about this is that so this is a retelling of Hades and Persephone's couple, love interest, romantic thing. So in the Greek mythology, I'm pretty sure some might know and some might not, but in the Greek mythology, Hades actually captures Persephone and then brings her down to the underworld to be his wife for 3 months. And that coincidentally happens to be the same 3 months that Demeter decides that nothing's gonna grow, and that is the explanation for winter and why when winter things don't grow. That's kind of what that Greek mythology is mostly about. That's the bare bones of it. That is kind of what goes on in here, except of course with different little nuances. What I thought was pretty interesting was that there was some world building going on in this book, but not too much. That was the main part of this book, because even though I know that Katee Robert has several books after this all in the same universe, they don't really build too much on each other's. They're more just there's references because they all are in the same universe. I guess the best kind of way to explain that is kind of like the Stephen King books, where they don't really, some of them do, but some of them don't really cooperate with each other that much. There's just references to the other books or the characters or what happens in the other books. So that's kind of what's going on here. What I did like is that there's not too much story building or world building, so it didn't feel like I was reading a whole fantasy book. It kind of is one of those that if you wanted to jump in because there's a specific coupling that you like from Greek mythology, or that just one that you think you might like in general, because on Katee Robert's website it does give a description of each of the books and kind of the love scenarios that are going to happen in those books. But I will say that what's pretty cool is you can kind of jump in as much as you want. I've only read this one. I haven't read the other ones yet, which I'm thinking, even though it's not really my genre that I gravitate towards, I did really like the way Katee Roberts did this retelling in a modern update. So what's pretty cool is that it seems that Olympus is a city in modern day times, because they have skyscrapers and apartments and all the works. There is references to an outside world, but it does seem that it is more Olympus and what they call the lower city, which is also like their version of the underworld, which is what Hades rules. So there's kind of that. What's pretty cool is the idea that the three main gods, so that would be Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, those are what they consider legacy roles. And that's pretty monumental towards the story, because what legacy roles means is that they are born into that role, and it's passed down through generations, versus the other roles in what they call the 13, where Persephone's mom, Demeter, that is an elected position. And it really does play out how Persephone views her mom, and kind of some of the why the story kicks off the way it does. I don't want to give too much off, because it is kind of a big shocker when I first read it, because that isn't necessarily what happens in the Greek mythology. There are in some retellings, but not in like the main in the main story. That's not typically what happens, but I think y'all will figure it out once you read it. What I thought was pretty cool, and this is kind of to give you an example of the way that Katee Robert like modernizes or updates this retelling of the Greek mythology, is that so this really isn't much of a spoiler, so you're fine, you don't have to skip past this. But so like how I mentioned earlier, in the Greek mythology, Demeter doesn't allow for things to grow because she's mourning, because she lost her daughter Persephone to Hades. So what happens in this one is that Persephone does end up with Hades at some point. I won't mention how or what's the situation, but she's upset, and because she's an elected official to the Demeter position, she controls the food supply to both the upper city and the lower city. And because of that, she ends up cutting off the food supply for the winter season. So they don't necessarily use it to describe that this is now winter, but more that like it's kind of the same. There's that little element that comes from the Greek mythology story that people weren't able to eat, so or she cut off the food supply, and she can do that as an elected official. And so I thought that was like pretty interesting how that was roped into there. There's also slight like namings, like Persephone's sisters also have the same names as her sisters in the Greek mythology. Because Demeter is an elected position, my thinking is that her mom was so ambitious to be the Demeter that she purposely named her children after Demeter's children. I'm not too sure about that. It doesn't necessarily give details on if that's the case, or if Persephone and her sisters adopted those names because her mom became elected. So it doesn't really mention too much about that. There is an element that some of these people have kind of somewhat magical abilities, or have abilities that are not very human-ish. It's kind of to debate on that. Like I said, there's not much world building in this. A lot of it is on the love romance between Hades and Persephone, or rather the fact that they're faking it. To me, this was kind of where I felt issue with the book, was that so they're supposed to be like together for about 3 months, just to follow the Greek mythology retelling, and there comes to the point where they fall into this trope where they say, I don't usually fall in love this fast and whatever. And I really hate when characters say, I don't really do this, but we have no record of them not falling in love fast before, and so we kind of just have to have the author's word or the character's word that that's not their usual behavior, even though it appears to seem that that is their behavior in the books, or as far as that the reader knows them. So if you have kind of issues with that, maybe might refrain. But I will say that the book, I was still able to kind of overlook that, and I still was able to enjoy the book for what it was, even though it is technically like, I don't know if it does fall. I think I did read that this one, it technically falls under romance, but it does have a lot of more mature content and more mature scenes that are explicitly described in this book. And I will say that even though there is an element of that, there is an element of the two characters building a relationship, so it doesn't feel superficial. I will say that the ending of this book, not going to give spoilers or anything because this is not this type of video, this is a no spoilers review, but the ending, I don't know if y'all know what these movies are, but they're like the Lifetime movies, which they kind of have like a lot of build up, and then there's the conflict and the big climax of the movie, and then it just like gets almost like instantly resolved, and there almost seems like all the worries and consequences that the main characters were thinking they were gonna face didn't face at all. And then there's just like a scene where, like, metaphorically, there's like that scene where it's like all the police cars, and then they're in the back of an ambulance, and they're like, you're fine, everything's gonna work out from here, type of thing. That's what this ending felt like. But I will say that the rest of the book is still really good, and I think this book, even though there's a larger conflict going on with Persephone, and especially with the what they call the 13, which is all the 12 Olympians plus, I believe, actually, yeah, all the 12 Olympians plus Hades, but Hades is sometimes not considered an Olympian in some mythology, but they call themselves 13. Those are basically just the leaders of Olympus in this book. But there is like that larger conflict that's going on that I think maybe kind of got pushed to the wayside, but it doesn't feel like as if it really should have needed to have been too much of a focus, because at the end of the day, this book is supposed to be focusing on the romance elements that happen in this story, which that's why I wasn't too mad about it. I was like, well, like, it makes sense if you're, you know, she's the author's not trying to make like a whole like 13 trilogy series, even though they probably could, because the conflict that's going on in this book is actually pretty good. And it's kind of like a big issue about it, but I will say that for the story fitting into one book that is decently sized, it is not too big, not too small. I think it barely just hits past, well, like prior to acknowledgements and all that, it's 377, so 377 pages. So like I said, a decent sized book. You kind of get a little bit of everything in there. So, and I will say that even though I did not think that this was like a mature romance novel when I first picked it up, I did still like the fact that when I picked it up, the reason I picked it up was because it was a Greek mythology retelling. I still liked the retelling. I thought it was like a really clever way, the way Katee Robert did it. So I will say that I gave this book a 3.5, mostly because of that ending. Because I really did feel like it felt like one of those like instantly, like everything's resolved and that's it, and that's the story, and there was like so much build up to like that conflict and what was gonna happen at the end. So that's why I would say it's a 3.5, but maybe if you can overlook that and you're more here for the romance, with that in mind, I will say that it was probably like a 4, maybe a 4.5 stars. I'm gonna say 4.5 stars, and I'm gonna mention this again. This is based on a scale of 5, so it isn't like on a scale of 10. This is on a scale of 5 stars, and I will say that because of everything, I would say 3.5, and if you're really here for just the romance, then I would say a solid 4. So yeah, that's everything for today, guys. Let us know in the comments below what y'all think about this book, whether or not you think you're gonna pick this book up, or if you're excited for the other titles that fall within this realm. I believe the series is called Dark Olympus series. I believe that's what Katee Robert has titled the series. But let us know if you're gonna pick up any other books, if you've read this book, or what other books we should review. Let us know. You can let us know in the comments below, or you can always go on to our Instagram, which is linked in the description below, and you can let us know there as well. Thank you guys. Bye.